Hi, thank you so much for inviting me today to talk about why robots still need to learn from people. My research has been dedicated to developing robots that can capture, respond, and learn from the complex social dynamics of real-world situations in an autonomous way. These robots are often called social robots, and my vision is to have these robots interacting with or assisting people in real-world environments like our homes, public spaces, or workspaces in an autonomous way. So this is challenging because, of course, people are challenging. They can behave unpredictably, they disappear from the robot's view, and they perform multiple actions at once. So if you think of a robot that needs to remind a person to take her medication, in this situation, when would be the right moment to intervene? And this actually becomes more challenging when we have more people in the interaction. So it becomes not just the human-robot interaction that the robot needs to consider, but also the interaction between, let's say, the other humans in the environment, and then learning how to behave in these situations becomes even more complex. So typically in the field, we use machine learning techniques to address this. And the typical pipeline of a multimodal human-robot interaction is that we start by collecting some data, either by recording human-human interactions or by recording human-robot interactions where the robot is typically teleoperated. And then we use this data to train models of the social behaviors that we want these robots to learn, either for perception or decision-making. Then, of course, we need to actually then train these models, see how they work offline, but also how they actually execute on a robot and when these robots are actually interacting with people. This is quite challenging because, of course, typically these data sets are very time-consuming to collect, and so they are typically small, especially if we're considering the scale of data set sizes of the existing large language models or vision language models. So it's not surprising that sometimes certain things are missing. In a paper that a work that we conducted a couple of years ago, we actually wanted to use a data-driven approach like the similar one that I just presented to generate, to have a robot learn back-channel behaviors in a learning task with the users. And so we took this typical pipeline of using an existing data set. We develop a deep learning model with the robot's back channels. What we found was that actually when we deploy this robot and had it interacting with people in a user study, that this learned model actually was back channeling way more significantly to the participants who identified as male than to the participants that identified as female. And upon inspection of our training data, actually, we learned that the conversational data set that we were using actually had way fewer females than males. And in fact, none of the female data was actually annotated. So we were training only our model in data from male participants. So not surprisingly, it didn't go so well. It didn't perform so well when the robot was actually interacting with female participants. And this is unfortunately the case in many other multimodal interaction data sets that exist out there. They are very gender unbalanced, most of them. So what I'm trying to say with this is that typically this pipeline needs a closer loop between these steps. So it's unlikely, very unrealistic to think that a model that we learn and train and then we deploy will actually work off the shelf. In many situations, we need to actually refine these, or if the robot encounters a different situation, it needs to be deployed in a different context. For example, certain things need to change. That means that we need a more interactive way to learn this. And there's this concept of interactive machine learning that actually was proposed about 10 years ago, in which it differentiates from the typical machine learning process where we have this more fixed approach of collecting some data, training and testing, by having a more iterative way on this machine learning process where typically users, non-experts, are more involved in refining these different sort of models that are trained. So it's a more human-in-the-loop learning approach. Of course, there's a challenge there because actually collecting large amounts of human feedback can be very time-consuming and expensive. And also then the the effectiveness of these human machine learning methods, let's say reinforcement learning from human feedback or preference-based learning, rely heavily on the efficiency and the quality of the human feedback that is provided. And this is not a challenge only in robotics, but also this human cost is one of the largest and very hidden costs of many generative AI systems, like large language models such as ChatGPT. So in our group, we've been looking into ways to scale up these human-in-the-loop machine learning systems, but taking a sustainable and human-centered approach for collecting human feedback. So that means that we want to actually collect human feedback, but while reducing the burden of the human, so let's say the amount of queries that we ask the people, and making the best of each type of feedback that we need to collect. We do this typically in the context of preference-based learning. So in preference learning, we are learning by predicting preferences or rankings between different sequences. These sequences can be trajectories, text, or images. And humans can give different types of feedback. For example, one very popular one is pairwise preferences. Let's say in this robot trajectory example, where we want to train a model to reach the end of the corridor in a way that people perceive as safe, we can ask which robot trajectory is safer for people in environment, trajectory A, where the robot actually almost collides with this human over here, or trajectory B, where even though the robot takes more time to reach the end of the corridor, it's actually more aware of the humans, virtual humans in this case, in the environment, and has a closer, more conservative distance between them. And these are things that are very difficult to learn from scratch. So one way to reduce this amount of human feedback is actually by increasing the granularity of the feedback in each query. In many cases, if we simply attribute a single preference to a pair of trajectories, there's a lot of relevant information that can be lost in this process. So in this work here, we actually amplify these initial definitions of preferences to account for something that we call highlights, which are basically state action pairs that are contain relatively high information within the trajectory. This can be good or bad information, meaning for how they contribute to the reward function. And actually with this approach, we were able to show that we can reduce the number of required preferences or queries that we ask people by letting them highlight their preferred trajectories. And this is even accounting for the fact that each polite query takes longer than a regular preference learning query without highlights. Of course, we're also taking advantage of the capabilities of large language models to improve these human-in-the-loop learning approaches. So in this work, which is an extension of polite, when a human is shown two preferences, instead of finding a time in a trajectory, they can actually provide an additional text justification for this preference. And then we use large language models to actually map this text into a set of predefined features that we define for a certain problem. And we use the highlights by understanding how these features are positive or negative in the queries that we show to humans. So the main takeaway message is that actually robots still need humans, despite the large amounts of data that we might still be able to collect. Because, of course, more data is helpful, but it's not always the answer. We also need to keep in mind about the quality and efficiency of the data that we collect. And so these human-in-the-loop approaches are often necessary, but also we need to take into account that they put a lot of bring additional cost and effort to real humans. And so avoiding human burden is important here. And so I hope I managed to, in this brief talk, to show you that we are taking, hopefully, and we encourage you all to take this responsible and human approach to robot autonomy while collecting human feedback. Thank you so much for your attention, and I'm happy to take some questions now.